Hi, everyone. Welcome to the special session of Lawyer on Air podcast. My name is Akiyo Inoko Hewitt. I'm an attorney based in Atlanta, Georgia, United States, and I'm licensed both in Japan and Georgia. Some of you might be wondering why you're hearing my voice instead of Catherine's. I'll explain why in just a minute. But just a little bit of my background. After moving to the United States, I started practicing law in 2017. I spent about 7 years working in a big law firm before moving into my current in-house role. I currently work at AI Medical, a Japanese startup company that develops and sells endoscopic AI that assists physicians to detect early cancer lesions. I'm a huge fan of Lawyer on a podcast, as you could probably see on LinkedIn as well. I listen to every single episode, and this podcast has given me so many different perspectives and inspirations. In June 2023, Catherine found me on LinkedIn and kindly invited me to this podcast as a guest. We'll put the episode on the show notes. Over the past few years, Catherine has invited so many guests who serve as board members for Japanese corporations. As many of you know, Catherine herself is on boards of Toyota and Fujitsu, which are two of the largest corporations in Japan. Recently, some of my friends from Keio Law School in Tokyo reach out to me and say, "Hey, Akiyo, there is a huge demand for female board candidates in Japan now, and you could potentially make a good candidate." So I've got interested in serving on a board in the future, but I have no idea how to start, where to start. And I thought many female attorneys probably feel the same way. So I reached out to Catherine because she's always so open. And I asked her if I could interview her on her podcast, my favorite podcast, Lawyer on Air podcast. And I wanted to get her insights on how her journey to the board looked like, how she has become a board member successfully, and her advice for early to mid career professionals. And she said yes. Yay. I was jumping up and down and so excited. And here we are. I'm very, very excited to dive into this conversation with Catherine today. Welcome,
Wow.
Catherine.
Wow. Akio, thank you so much. What an exciting introduction. And I hope everyone's now hooked hearing your voice instead of mine. And yeah, good on you for asking me, right? If we don't ask, we don't get. So
Mhm.
thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for accepting my suggestion. And as usual, I'd like to get started with our first question. Imagine that we are grabbing a drink together. Where are we and what's your order?
You know, I love this question, and it
Mhm.
always brings out so many wonderful replies from people. So, my go to place right now is the Indigo Hotel in Shibuya. So it's located in kind of up in Dogenzaka area. It's quite lively, lots of young people are there. And a New Zealand friend of mine is the general manager, and it's amazing. They have vegan friendly foods. The staff are wearing uniforms designed by Rebecca, who runs the show. And the staff are just so friendly and warm. I had my third year podcast party there in March, and we had a champagne tower. So it was a fountain of champagne flowing down like a Christmas tree, but champagne. And so that would be what I would be ordering. Whatever is recommended by the sommelier or the staff who come up to me, they always know I want to order a bubbly. So I would order whatever their recommendation is, but it's probably something sparkling. So when you come to Japan next time, let's go there because I'd love to introduce you.
Yeah, I love bubbly. I love sparkling wine, any champagne, anything. And I actually know that hotel from your post on LinkedIn. I think you
Mm.
had Women in Law Japan event there as well.
Correct. That's
Mhm.
exactly right. We had the summer sizzle party there in June. That might have been some influence from me to get that venue. I obviously want to go to a place that I love being there, and I wanted to introduce it to other people who may not know about it. It's not an obvious selection, but once you go there and you enjoy your time there, you always want to go back.
I'd love to go there with you.
Yay.
And so I'd love to ask you about your journey to a board role. When did you start thinking about becoming an outside board member or an outside auditor?
Mm. Yeah, this is a really good question because I realized that I actually started seriously considering a board role back in 2012. I went to an event about women on boards. There were two senior women on a panel. One was Japanese and one was foreign. And they were really established in the board community here and had great experiences to share. But what struck me at the time was they spoke about everything except the practical steps to actually get on a board. So
Mm.
when I asked directly, I built up this notepad with questions and I asked the question. They responded to me saying, it's difficult, it's really dependent on who you know, and that I'd have to figure it out on my own. I remember then being really taken back by that response, but I accepted it as the reality. And looking back, there were some valuable takeaways from them and their response. No one hands you a board role on a silver platter, and it does take your initiative and your persistence. But I also felt, on the other hand, strongly that experienced board members should open doors for the next generation and they should share their insights on how to navigate this path that's got no signposts. So, having been derailed at that time in 2012 and thinking, I can't find the way, I just have to somehow work it out, I didn't actively return to the board search track until probably 5 years later in 2017, when I left my corporate law position at a company and started my own law firm practice. Running my own firm gave me a real independence. It removed all the conflicts of interest that had probably existed in the past. It made me kind of more of a viable candidate for boards. I had my entrepreneurial experience that I was building up and a really genuine interest in Japanese companies where I'd spent my whole time in Japan so far. So those are the things that I did. I suppose that's my journey. 2017 maybe where I came back on the track again.
Now you're doing opposite thing and you are helping other lawyers. And I see that from LinkedIn and just the fact that you accepted my suggestion to interview you. And so thank you for that. And so you had no help back in 2012 and 2017, you're serious again. What kind of actions did you take?
Good question, right? These are so important. And because I was no longer working for someone as an employee, I was myself and I needed to show that in some way. And so I decided that I had to reshape my CV as the first thing
Mhm.
and transform it from what was like an executive CV into one that was ready for board presentation. So I started by developing what I would call like a governance statement that
Mhm.
showed the value that I can give to a board and make that really crystal clear. It's only a paragraph, but it's a really important paragraph that takes a little while to craft genuinely and also perfectly on point about the value you can contribute. So it's not just listing your law, your compliance, the investigations for ethics that I'd done, or building and managing a law firm. It was explaining how those experiences contributed to my what would be governance capabilities, right? So I like to think of someone who's board ready as being like a multi-layered cake, right? There are all kinds of cakes, chocolate cakes, sponge cakes, whatever. But having the skills and experiences is just the base layers of the cake. They're essential, but they're not enough on their own, right? You could eat it, but it's not very tasty. So what really makes a candidate stand out is those unique fillings that you put into the cake. the strategic insight, the relationship building skills, and that special icing, or perhaps in the States you call it frosting, the icing on top that differentiates you from other candidates. So after creating that CV, I began selecting people to talk to and telling them about my interest in a board role. And I didn't choose everybody. I think the big mistake people make is telling people too widely, I'm after a board position. It just dilutes the impact of what you're trying to share. So I'd work on that really concisely, who to speak with. And then that governance statement I mentioned before, you have to be able to say it. It's not just on paper. So creating a concise governance elevator pitch, 30 seconds of when you meet someone, what you can say to them in that moment about your vision for yourself on a board position. Yeah, I think that's what I did as my first few actions. The other thing I did was research some companies. There's so many companies in Japan, just as you said, your KO friends. There's plenty of opportunity, and the pie is always getting bigger, not smaller, for opportunities for board roles in Japan. So I researched some companies I'd heard of that I liked. I won't mention them now, but ones that resonated with me. And I would study their profiles and figure out what skills they were seeing on the board that they needed, where there were some gaps that I could probably help with. And that would give me some unique insight into where I could deliver my value to a board. So those were the first things that I did.
How many people did you meet or see around that time?
Probably under 10. Yeah, I just kept it to a select group that I had watched and seen active in the board community, or who were connected to someone who was connected to a board. So the 2 or 3 degrees of separation. So I just targeted people, as you would normally do for any marketing. You don't just shoot a gun at everybody, right? You target who it's going to be and hit the bullseye. So I would say it was probably under 10.
Out of those 10 people, who supported you and how did you find and connect with them?
Yeah, this is just such a fabulous question because it goes to the heart of everything, where you find your people, actually where they find you. So let me tell you a couple of stories that sort of are around serendipity and unplanned happenstance. So I was at an event where I was making a presentation to a group about my journey to becoming an entrepreneur. And I spoke about having been in a chrysalis, right? That was during my life as a lawyer in private practice in-house, and how becoming a law firm owner was bursting out of that chrysalis and becoming like a butterfly and free to fly. And this was quite an emotional presentation. And one of the people in the audience, who was a mother, started to cry. And I was talking about my parents and my family and my friends and my values and how they had formed everything that I do. And after that event, another person came up to me and said, I loved what you said. It was really inspiring. And have you ever thought about being on a board in Japan, a Japanese company? And I stood there thinking, who delivered this person to me in my time of need? Who answered my prayers? Who believed in what I just said? And it was all about sort of timing. If you're a good person, I think good comes to you at the right time. So as it happened, she introduced me to an executive search firm. I met with them. Several months later, I received an invite to interview for a family company in Japan, and then also a really large company in Japan. And both of those were unsuccessful. But I found the process of interviewing extremely insightful about this black box of interviewing for board roles. And I understood about myself what I actually wanted. And I thought I knew something else or wanted something else with big companies or whatever. So failing was like a comma, not a full stop, right? And so not being successful was actually helping me to get successful later on. And another thing happened at the beginning of my journey. As you know, I provide fractional legal support for companies. So a company hired me in to help them while somebody had gone from the firm. Their lawyer had disappeared from the company, and I was there sort of bridging for 6 or 8 months. And I got to know the team, I got to know the C-suite people, I got to know the people in all the departments and overseas, and help them through this tricky phase. skipping forward a few years later in 2020, they needed someone on their board and they reached out to me. They knew I had the legal and compliance experience, and they were seeking someone who knew how they operated, their business line. I knew their team. And so it was actually during that phase of being an employee for them that I was kind of interviewing for the ultimate role of being on their board. So that's the other way that I got to be supported, is that someone who was my previous employer ended up being the person who was inviting me to then be on their board. So my point here is that you often do not find these roles. You can't always go and find them and grab them. They have a way of coming to you, and it could be from some direction that you never know is going to happen. So that's what I wanted to let you know about that part of your question. Can I tell you one more story?
Yes.
So there was one more occasion. It was during COVID, and I was getting my COVID vaccination, and in this reception area, mask on, waiting, and a person I knew came up to me, and she had been on boards for several years, and she said to me, I've noticed you don't speak down to Japanese companies. You don't tell them what to do. Rather, you meet them where they are at and you help them. She said, I think that's really attractive and that a Japanese board would really love to have you. Let me introduce you to my super duper valued recruiter. Are you interested? And I said, oh my goodness, yeah, sure. So, there's emotional impact of that presentation. There's this first connection that I made at that event. There's the growth of these interview experiences of not getting the roles. There's that happenstance relationship building. There's someone watching you all the time and observing how you are. So you're always interviewing for a board role in everything you do. And that's what's led, to these opportunities. So if I've got one gem of advice out of all of this that we're going to talk about today, it's just what I said then.
Great. When you showed your authenticity in a presentation or during the interim position at a company, then they liked you personally. And that led you to the connections that you really needed.
That's right. I mean, it's a given that you're a lawyer. They know what lawyers do. What else have you got? Who are you? Are you someone that can converse with them on the board? Are you someone that they can trust? So it's about these other unwritten, intrinsic things that we've got going on inside that we show up as that really makes the difference.
How long did it take from deciding to pursue a board position to actually being appointed as a board member?
I would say it's about 8 years then. If you think about that 2012 experience with the panel that I talked about to my actual appointment on that company that invited me back, that was 2020. So that's 8 years. And that was a small non-listed company, but a great entry point. And I loved working with them and have only just released that role with them after 4 years. And it took really from 2012 a decade to get to that big first role with Fujitsu, which was in 2022. So I'd say 8 years to the small position and 10 years to the big position. And that's just my experience. Some people take a little shorter perhaps, but it's at least 2. But for me, 8 to 10 years. Yeah.
And looking back, what advice would you give to your younger self about this journey?
Goodness, this is a great one, isn't it? I mean, first, remember that advice from other people often reflects what they have as their own fears and insecurities rather than universal truths. I think some people said to me when I started my own business, and we'll get to that, what are you doing? It's risk. Why are you doing that? But when someone tells you something like that, they're often revealing what they would or would not do based on their own experiences. So you take that advice from them as just one perspective in a whole spectrum and trust your own judgment. So I'd tell Catherine to trust her own judgment. Second, believe in yourself, Catherine. Believe in yourself. It's a well-known saying, whether you think you can or you can't, you're right. So self-belief is so fundamental here. Third, I'd say timing is everything, as I've just revealed. Looking back at 2012, maybe I wasn't ready for a boardroom then. The people advising me may have sensed that as I asked my question from the audience. even if their words could have been more encouraging at that time to me. Over the years, I think, building things, building this brand, building my values, honing on my boundaries, that got me ready. And I think also when I was noticed, right, by that person, you're always being surveyed and analyzed. So just be aware of your circumstances, Catherine. You're always in interview. And I think fourth, from those failed experiences on the interviews that didn't go forward, would be don't be like a moth to the flame and be so attracted to big company names or impressive titles. And I don't mean that in respect to anything that's happened since, but at that time, that was certainly something that I thought about. A little bit of vanity crept in there, right? This is a big company. I can do this job. Imagine what I would look like if I had this board role. Completely wrong thinking, right, to approach in that way. So trust your instincts, stick with your values. And had I got that first large company role, things may have gone off the rails for my board career after that. So never deviate from your core and your trust and your gut.
Very wonderful advice to
Yeah, where
your
was
younger
she
self.
when I needed her? She's here now, though, to help others, right? You can't go back into history, but you certainly can go forward and help others.
Your story reminded me of when I was in middle school, like junior high school in Nagoya. My teacher told me that, Akiyo, your math grade is not that good. And so if you want to become international lawyer, it's a tough way to go. You probably wouldn't be able to pass the bar exam. And I came home, talked to my mom about it, and she said, that's totally wrong. If you take the bar exam and fail it for a few times, let's talk about that then. And so she just supported me the whole way from college to through law school and the bar exam. And without her encouragement at that time, I wouldn't be here today. And so I think you are helping younger professionals, and that's your passion and that's your mission. And I think for your board position at Toyota and Fujitsu, when you say everyone that believe in yourself and just empowering female lawyers, I think so many people need to hear that.
Yeah, and I think your mum's example there gives you what I've just said about, your teacher said one thing and you believed, like the people on the panel, I believed. Of course we do, but it's one perspective. And thankfully, your mum came in and gave you another one and you trusted your gut on that. And yeah, maths, no lawyer can do maths. We do need financial savviness to be on a board, and eventually we'll get to that. But yeah, for the bar, perhaps it's not that necessary.
Thank you for that. So last year, which is 2023, the Japanese government set a goal of having at least 30% female board members at all companies listed on the Tokyo Stock Exchange Prime Market by 2030. Did this goal or target come as a surprise to you? Or if you know, could you tell us a bit about the background of the target?
Yeah, I think the Japanese government's goal of reaching at least 30% of female board representation on the Tokyo Stock Exchange's prime market didn't really come as a surprise. And I'll tell you why. Because Japan's a society that values goal setting and establishing clear targets and driving policy and business towards those targets. And the Japanese government set those similar targets in the past. In fact, in 2020, they wanted leadership positions to be 30%. That ultimately was extended because there was a bit of a slow progress there. But, maybe 30% was thought as ambitious, and perhaps some thought, why not 40% like most of the Western countries have? But it was a very Japanese way. And also Japan is unique. It has its challenges in that it's got deeply rooted societal norms and traditional male-dominated corporate culture. So, 30% was actually a meaningful target. And if you know Japan really well, you know that they have this system of nemowashi, right? Letting people
Mhm.
know things in advance. So before the 30% was announced, there were already rumors and conversations going around. So you kind of got the idea that something was coming. So the 30% wasn't a shock. And it was actually like, yeah, it's about time. And oh, they're finally delivering what they said they would do before in that pre round of conversation. And I think, the background stems from Japanese recognition that greater diversity on boards isn't just about equality, it's about competitiveness and about governance. And studies have shown, if you look on the Google or anywhere, you will find that diverse boards contribute to better decision making and improved corporate governance and ultimately higher profitability for companies. And given Japan's aging workforce and its aging population, female participation in the boardroom is really important for economic vitality of Japan, right? So, yeah, it was coming. It just took a little longer and it was done in a very Japanese way. So 30% is attainable. Perhaps 40% would have been too much of a stretch goal, but there we are.
Do you know what led the mandate? Was there any international pressure behind the scene?
Yeah, I think it did a little bit. I mean, Japan's on the G7, right? So international bodies and investors have really increasingly emphasized the importance of diversity and gender equality on corporate boards in Japan. So there's been a bit of pressure, I think, from Japan's peers on the G7, as well as other developed countries that are not on G7 but have got advanced board rates where women are participating. So I think Japan has a really high participation of women in academia, but it's been very obvious that there's low participation in politics. We see photographs of maybe one or two women amongst a sea of black tuxedo suits that they wear in the government when they've announced the cabinet. And it's been really noted, and people see that on the global stage. So it was becoming so obvious that I think, yes, there was pressure, although it's not written anywhere. It's definitely something that you feel happened beforehand. And particularly, as I mentioned, those foreign investors are applying pressure to Japanese companies. And so it was a natural place that it would finally happen, probably through the avenue of G7 and conversations that we may never get to hear about. But that ultimately led to what happened.
By 2023, you were already a board position at Toyota and Fujitsu. What was your reaction to the target?
I just thought it was about time. A lot of my friends in New Zealand, for example, were surprised that it wasn't higher. But in explaining what I just did about Japan and its unique situation and entrenched male dominance,
Mhm.
30% was actually attainable. So, and it's got a good ring to it, right? 30 by 2030. It's very easy to remember. And it was kind of necessary because people had to have that to get started. If there was nothing, we probably wouldn't have moved from there at all. So it's kind of necessary for someone like me who'd gone a different route and didn't need to be part of a 30% shift. That's okay too. But we did need it in the society, I believe, to get Japan moving forward.
Now I'd like to shift our conversation into a little bit more sensitive area that is not commonly talked about publicly. For female board members, particularly younger ones we are going to see in the next few years, they will be a lot younger than male board members. And there may be some instances where they are treated differently or they're seen differently, as in Japanese it's called joseiwaku, and in English it's called female quota hire or DEI hires, not necessarily by fellow board members, but executives or employees working to prepare board materials. When you encounter that kind of situation where someone assumes that you are in a boardroom or you are appointed because you're a woman, I'd like to prepare for that situation. And how should we react to that? And how should we respond to that?
Well, prepare is the word, the key word, is you know this is going to come. It's going to come from someone, somewhere, at an event or a gathering or a meeting where it pops up, but you know it's coming. So you prepare for that. How do you prepare? You have a set of answers or ways to respond. If you're not prepared, you'll be caught in the headlights and just like, oh, yeah, maybe it is that we're DEI hires. Wrong, right? Have the right answer that's natural and authentic for you, prepared. So the way I deal with this now, when I hear it, is using humor and confidence. So first, I might highlight achievements. Like, yeah, I acknowledge that in certain circumstances, diversity initiatives have opened doors for people. But I think my qualifications and my contributions speak for themselves. So something like that is an answer. Or reframing the conversation, turning DEI assumption into an opportunity. For instance, you could say, that's an interesting comment, but quotas open doors, and that's really impactful for diverse insights and drives innovation. But I'm focused on delivering outcomes for the companies that invited me and providing my diverse, innovative ideas for them, right? So that's kind of the things that I might say. I'll share a story how my selection process was quite rigorous and that I went through 4 or 5 interviews, that I had to pass all of those hurdles to get there. And the other thing I often do is just say to somebody who's asked this, and sometimes they do this, well, if you could get it, then I guess if you can get this board position, anyone can. And I invite them to certainly go and try that. But I don't think anyone can. And they have to be a specific kind of person and demonstrate the skills that I've talked about earlier. But if you can do it, I'll say to them, I'll buy you a magnum of champagne, knock on my door, hit me up for it, and I'll share that with you. And I'm still waiting for them to do that. So I think check in the notion about DEI and quota, but come up with your own authentic way of expressing your response to that. To a certain extent, quotas open the doors, but what are you going to say next to counteract them? But do it pleasantly, maybe with a touch of humor, but certainly with a lot of confidence.
I love that you already prepare for the scenario and have several types of answers that you would probably pick under certain circumstance.
Yeah, the worst thing is not knowing when something's coming and you get sidewiped, right? But if you know it's going to come and this is definitely going to be asked, prepared, right? It's going to happen. So what are you going to say in that situation? Then you're not caught unawares.
I love that. I'd love to learn more about practical side of preparing for a board role. What kind of documents or materials do you need to submit when you apply for a board position? You said resume and a paragraph and any other documents?
Yeah, so of course you need that CV. So and instead of focusing on that mechanical delivery of what you've done, where you worked, having that, conveying your mindset and strategy towards what value you contribute is super important. And, typically a Japanese company will want to see a CV that's in Japanese, and you would also present it in English because there's probably board members that are already English speaking or they work in an English language as well as their native language. And so having the two things together is important. In some cases, it's an English CV with the Japanese keireksho, right, your working record. So that's really important. And then the other documents, really, that's all you need for your interview. You might be asked to submit other things, but it starts from what do you look like on paper? And it's really the interview process that starts to unpack who you are and what kind of person you would be for them on the board. So the paperwork at the beginning is super easy if you've got it all prepared again, but it's really being ready for the interview that's the crux of the matter, right? It's pretty structured and streamlined in Japan that you'll submit those, that you'd have an interview first with HR from the company, and they would explain the role, the process of being appointed. Perhaps they'd talk about remuneration at that point, and then you'd be called for another interview if that's also where they see you being successful to go to the next step. So the documentation is really only a couple of things. So it's not, again, maybe that's broken down a barrier for you to hear that, that you might have to prepare lots and lots of things. Of course, they have to be really well prepared, but that's typically what you need.
That's surprising because I thought for Japanese companies, you probably need to submit a lot of documents, but it's surprising that you submit, just a little
At that
document
stage. At
at
that
that.
stage, yes. Yeah.
Wow. And I'd like to ask you about the timeline of the selection process. For majority of Japanese corporations, which fiscal year end is March 31st, and shareholders meetings are typically held in June. If you could walk us through the general timeline for board selection process in Japan, that would be fantastic.
Sure. So typically it would start around October, November. So we're talking in November right now in 2024. So it's well underway that interviews are happening for appointments in June 2025. So companies are identifying candidates, they're interviewing them. And this is when current board members and executive managers talk about things in discussions. Who do we need? Where have we got skill gaps? Who's rolling off the board? Who do we need to bring in? And they often engage search firms to help, but they often ask amongst the board members who might be available through their network. So in November, you typically get your first interview, as I mentioned, with the HR people. By January, if you're really seriously being considered, you would have already had another 3 or so interviews over December through to the January period. So you need to be around, even through the holiday periods, just to be aware, because you've got to be available. They'll want to understand your governance philosophy, skills. Are you the kind of person that could fit in with their dynamics? That doesn't mean you're a yes person or a no person. It means how will you communicate with them under all the different kinds of pressures and strategic ideas and discussions that they have to have. Interviews in those stages are usually with, as I mentioned, HR first. You'll meet with board members who ask you several questions. The board chair will have an interview with you, and the CEO and the chairman. By February, the selection process is basically focused down on 2 candidates, and they normally decide through the Shimeinkai, the nominations committee, and it's presented to the board, and the board approves the nomination of that person to go forward. Before the fiscal end of the year in March, there's an announcement of candidates who are on the slate to be appointed. So the news becomes public in March. Some nominees share about them being nominated to be on the board subject to the shareholders' approval. Others like to stay quiet around March until it's actually formal. It really depends on the person. In March, there's a little bit of a pause while the company gets its financial end-of-year reports done. And then from April to May, this is what you're probably thinking about earlier, is that there's a whole rush to get a bundle of documents together to submit to the company. So you don't present these at the beginning during the interview stage, they come later. And the reason is during that interview period, they've already done a lot of due diligence on you. They've asked a lot of people about you. They've found out about you in the market. They've gone into a deep dive into all of your social media and everything about you. So they already know you're the one. So they only want the documents to confirm the basics and the formalities. So you'll get your streamlined CV submitted, a background check will have been done. They'll make sure that you can do a conflicts check, that you're not dealing with any of the other companies that are in their whole list of subsidiaries, etc. You'll need to submit like a residence certificate. There's also a final interview that you would go through with the CEO, again, just to tidy things up. And then as you approach May to June, the company holds internal meetings to finalize everything that's outstanding. You have your photo submitted, and it goes into the shareholders' convocation notice that is distributed to all the shareholders. And so when you see that finally your photo and your bio is inside this document that's going to the shareholders, it really hits home that you're up. And then the annual general meeting in June is when the shareholders vote. Some submit their votes in advance. And if you're inducted to the board at the shareholders meeting, you basically start from day one. So you've got to be ready to go from then to be participating in the board And so that's the process. It feels like a long time, a number of months, but it's actually quite fast. And it's all designed to make everything very smooth and run. So not so much at the front end, but as you start to be approved, then there's a whole rush to get everything together and nice and tidy for the shareholders to vote on.
Thank you so much for all the details. I knew nothing about it, and so thank you so much.
You're welcome. I knew nothing about it until it happened myself. So, now I can let people know how the process goes.
How long was the shortest interview and the longest interview out of all interviews you had?
The longest interview was 2.5 hours.
Wow.
The shortest interview was about an hour and 10.
For those of us, including myself, with less than 10 years of experience, what steps can we take now to be a better candidate in the future when the time comes? Are there any certifications, training program, or experience and skills that the companies are looking for in board candidates?
There's definitely steps you can take to bring yourself to being quite a strong candidate down the line. And taking small steps is really important, like really small steps, and not diving in. So I'm going to give about 5 or 6 different areas you can take steps in. So if you took small steps in each of these areas, you're probably going to be well on your way. So number 1 is gaining governance experience early. And you might be thinking, what does that mean? I'm not on a board. How do I get on a board so early? Is that you don't have to wait to get on a board. You can seek out advisory roles for non-profits, professional associations, in Japan, Women in Law Japan, Executive Committee. That's a board. It's dealing with people and around a table and seeing how things are discussed. And you can do it for startups as well, right? These experiences are incredibly valuable. They teach you the fundamentals of governance, strategy, risk management, and all the skills that you'll need, or pretty much all the skills you'll need for a governance role. Number 2, we talked about math before, right, and your school teacher, but building your financial literacy for a board role is key, right? One of the key skills you'll need is financial acumen. You don't need to be an accountant and you don't need to pass the math test, but you certainly do need to be able to look at a balance sheet, look at the P&L, and be able to understand what's going on in the company in terms of finances. Some people do go and get a CPA certification, but that's not really necessary. If you want to do that, go for it. But you do need to get the solid foundation in financials. Maybe you hire a friend who's a CPA and you get some mentoring, or maybe you find a course that can help you get more financially savvy. Third is focusing on certificates and training. You highlighted that in your question. Some countries have certifications. If I go to where I know very well, New Zealand, Institute of Directors there has a program that you can do. In Japan, they also have the Japan Association of Corporate Directors, BDTI, on board. There's a few other organizations like that. Singapore has a great course. The Financial Times has a board course. There's all kinds of options and ways to get the skill on a certificate if you want to do that and prepare yourself. Number 4 would be develop a cross-functional skill set. So boards really value those people who are bringing a range of experiences. So try and diversify what you're doing right now in the company that you're in or the law firm you're in. Get strategic projects, stretch assignments, work in cross-functional teams. Get yourself really into the broader aspects of the company. Don't just stick into your law department desk. Go out and find a few things that you can do. Even try a side gig, doing something else that's entrepreneurial using your skills there. And number 5, I would say, is strengthen your communication and stakeholder management skills. You asking me to interview me on this podcast is a way of strengthening your communication skills. It took a lot of boldness to do that. You can show people later on that you interviewed me on this podcast. That's a way of showing you've got an inclination to improve your skills in communication. So get on a podcast, be a guest, do an interview like this. get familiar with talking and being really comfortable in sharing your position on things. It's not something you're going to know about how to do at the first stage, but you build your muscle like anything. And I think the last one, number 6, would be leverage your network, build your network. Finding a network is huge. And it's not really networking so much as relationship building. And that's key, right? Doing things with a giver's mindset, helping others first before expecting to always be given something, always doing things for others, connecting with mentors who are already out there in the community, getting involved in professional associations. That's important, right? And boards look at those things that you've done. So those would be my sort of 6 things. Look for board roles that are kind of like a board role. Invest in your financial literacy. Consider board certifications. Work on your cross-functional expertise, communication skills, and build relationships with others. If you take small steps in those areas, you're going to be going a long way towards getting yourself ready for a board role.
That's absolutely gold. I want to take all of the items and just, we are checking regularly what kind of improvement we've made in the past 2-3 months of all the items you said. I think we'll be getting ready.
Yeah, it's ready.
In a few years.
Getting ready to be ready, right? So, and as I said, it sounds like a lot, but if you break it down into small steps, what can I do on a communication thing today? Who can I ask about getting a stretch project? Who else can I have to mentor me on that part of that balance sheet I don't understand? Who do I know? Those are little steps you can take, right? And it's whole, it looks like a lot, but broken down, anything is easy to take one step.
Join Catherine and Akiyo for part 2 coming soon, where they talk more about Catherine's journey to starting her own law practice and all of those questions you've wanted to know about Catherine herself. Cheers, kampai, and bye for now.